and welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast with your host, Gordon Glenister. Well, today we're going to be talking all about payments, but more specifically about an amazing guy that runs the payments podcast, isn't it? The payments shed, yeah. That's right, which is really fantastic. Grant, it's so lovely to have you with us today. So we're going to have some really interesting conversation, not just about the sector, but of course your story. And of course, how long have you been doing the podcast now?
We actually only launched our first episode in October last year, so it's been a bit of a whirlwind, but Justin and I had launched and run podcasts for two sort of previous employers that we worked together at, and then when we went our separate ways professionally, we decided that it was the right time to take our own brand and launch our own thing on the side, and here we are now.
Of course, you work for WorldPay, which is a leading provider in the sector. So tell us a little bit about your journey in the payment sector.
Yeah, so I've been in payments for 16 years now. Got into it when I was 20 years old, and most people that work in payments have a kind of interesting origin story of how they stumbled their way into the sector. It's not one you kind of go to university and think I'm going to go and work in payments, as most people say, but my origin story was I dropped out of university. My brother had some contacts and friends. He was an IFA, a financial advisor, and he was working with a company called Accept Cards, small independent sales organisation for payments up in Yorkshire. And he said to me, you should go meet Richard and Mark, the founders. They've got a guy in sales who's just left. They sell card machines to bars and restaurants and things. I thought, that sounds absolutely terrible. I know nothing about that. And he said, just go and meet them, hear what they've got to say. It's an interesting industry. And went and had a chat with them. They sold me the dream, told me about the commission you could earn as a sales guy, selling payment systems into I said many bars and restaurants and things early days. And the rest is history. I kind of moved from point of sale selling to e-commerce to open banking, and moved into management a few years ago, and now lead the embedded payments division at WorldPay here in the UK.
So you have, of course, your podcast, the Payments Shed. Why did you come up with that idea?
So the real story is I launched a newsletter, which was the Payment Shed newsletter originally, which I've done for a couple of years now, sort of a weekly check-in on payments and fintech, and that started to take off. But the name for that I have a home office in my garden, and when I first bought the house, it was already there. It wasn't painted. It looked like kind of a sauna, and people were calling it the sauna on Teams calls. As just out of COVID, everyone's working from home, and I thought, everyone keeps calling this thing a sauna. I'm going to paint it. So I painted it grey, made it all look nice and modern. I thought, no one's going to call it a sauna now, and everyone just started calling it a shed instead. So I thought, well, everyone makes a joke about me working in a shed, so I'm going to call it the Payment Shed, and the rest is history on that.
Which is great. And so how important do you think when you're working, you come through the sort of sales network, and so often, people will share little bits of content on LinkedIn here, there and everywhere, but there's a difference between being a real authority and proper content creator in a sector and a specific, and I know you've become a top LinkedIn voice as well. Why do you think it's important to have that almost like somewhat separate from your day job, being an ambassador for the sector?
I think the two worlds certainly collide. I think from my point of view, and I think you speak to other influencers, if you will, in the space, and they always talk about consistency, making sure you're consistent with your content, whether that's frequency of posting, find your niche or your vertical. Some people say to me, like, and Justin as well, with the podcast, like, our brand is quite consistent, whether we're doing a newsletter, whether we're doing podcast videos, like, we have consistency of brand. And I think there's previously in our industry this misconception that, you couldn't share anything with a competitive network. You've got thousands of people that work for your competitors potentially on a platform like LinkedIn. And actually, I think that's nonsense. You should share this knowledge, and it's a very collaborative industry at its core. My network of followers and people that follow the podcast engage, thousands of them work for different payment companies to WorldPay. And I think they just appreciate, Justin works in payments and fintech as well. They just appreciate us being open with the knowledge we've gained over 16 years, each working in the industry, and things we see day in, day out, and just the market coverage as well. It's an educational tool in many ways.
Well, I was going to say, you're recognising the great work and improving best practice, and perhaps talking about things that aren't always shared openly, and I think it's important for people like yourself to be sharing that. And on that, challenges and issues that are popping up in sort of payments at the moment, and I'd love to get your thoughts around buy now, pay later. schemes that we are starting to see, and how important do you think it is for government to regulate certain things?
I think it certainly needs regulation. I think they've started on that journey. You know, the education is a generational thing, right? And I talk with people about this quite a lot. You know, older generations generally use credit cards. We're familiar with using credit cards. That's our source of credit. But younger generations have always had buy now, pay later in their life. But it's, you know, been marketed in a way where, you know, Klarna have their pink branding. They're very creative with the marketing. It's seen as an easy thing to do in the checkout. But the education around the implication of missing that third payment hasn't really been there historically. And I think the market has got a lot better at that. And the work the government are doing to make sure regulation exists is very important, because you have ended up with young individuals that have not understood the risks of not repaying those payments, and they spiral into this, you know, bad debt, and it impacts their credit report for potentially years, right? So that is sometimes the risk of a new product coming to market without the regulation built around it in the first instance. But I do feel buy now, pay later, we're very close to a regulated state where that problem will be removed from the market in due course.
AI is playing its role pretty much everywhere in every sector, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's lots of examples of where AI is going to be transformative, particularly when it comes to sort of data analytics. But what about stuff like using AI to credit check individuals? Are there pros and cons of that?
So I think we've started to use open banking more prevalently as a way to do that. So you're giving, you know, an open banking provider the access to your bank account to check the payments that you make, to check the balances, etc. And, you know, in Australia, it's quite common that you'll use open banking as part of a loan application. So they're assessing your worthiness for a loan or a mortgage or whatever it might be. AI may feed into that at some point, but the notion of allowing AI to access your banking information, I think, would terrify most people. And as an industry, we're very buzzword and hype in mindset, like that exists within payments. So every year there's one or two new things, and AI probably has been the longest one of those buzzwords, as most industries, right? You can just say, well, AI will help you do this or help you get there quicker. With payments, it's mainly being talked about at the moment from an agentic commerce point of view. So can I use AI to go and book a holiday for me, to go and do my Amazon order? I want to find 4 jumpers for my trip I've got coming up, and I want them to be these 4 colours and these 2 brands, and go and find me the cheapest options from these 5 websites. So you're setting that in motion, and then you get to the payments side of that. It's like, well, how do you then authorise that transaction? We spent a very long time in payments bringing biometric security in. That means we have to know exactly who that individual is from a biometric point of view. So I think we'll get to a point where agentic goes and does those things for you. It gives the recommendations, but you still have to go and authorise or trigger that final payment. So it can do a lot of the heavy lifting around your shopping experience, but we keep the security in place. That's not to say AI won't be used by fraudsters to try and attack payment systems. So we end up at this point where AI is defending us from a payment system point of view, but it's also attacking us.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite fascinating, actually. I see some of the advancements, particularly in Asia, where you can go into retail business and you can go and pay for a product with just your eyes. Because that is linked to your WeChat.
Yes.
And that sort of technology is quite phenomenal.
I think in Asia, like, they've lived within the wallets and application ecosystem for a long time, really, and they're actually way further ahead than European markets, certainly in the US, as far as like that trust in having everything in your, you know, passports in the US are going digital now, as an example. But, you know, those sort of IDs and, you know, all of your banking, all of your payments, all of your, you know, promotional tools, taxi apps, travel apps, whatever, they live in the wallet very much in that. Cash is in decline in a big way. You know, India removing cash and going down the UPI route. You know, I think we can learn a lot from those markets. In some way, we kind of cling on to the notion that cash has to be around forever.
Why is that? I mean, we're supposed to be leaders in the world in so many areas, aren't we? And yet, I can't help but be so inspired by what's coming out of Asia generally, not just China, but that whole sector with technology and advancement.
Yeah, there's an argument that it can be, you know, not inclusive, right, to individuals that maybe struggle with technology or, you know, generational challenges or, you know, disabilities, things like that, where you do want to keep certain payments infrastructure and financial infrastructure in place to service that minority group that would otherwise be impacted. But I think at some point you have to be realistic. I mean, we'll say that checks were supposed to disappear a decade ago and they're still being sent like utilities companies when they owe you money, right? So they're still around. Yeah.
Funny, yeah. And what about sort of this whole world of crypto and sort of stable coins?
Yeah.
How do you see that sort of, because it's had a bit of a mixed reputation, hasn't it? But nevertheless, the technology behind blockchain is quite fascinating.
You can go down that buzzword spiral again. I think crypto is such a broad term. There's so many different elements of the crypto ecosystem, and stable coins fundamentally are generally fiat driven, so that they have a USD value or a central currency value that is stable in principle. It's secure, and I think certainly in the payments industry, we see stable coins as something that will just become business as usual over the next few years. It has enabled, countries where money movement was a bit slower or more expensive previously to kind of circumnavigate some legacy systems. But I think when you think of the common individual on the street who doesn't know payments inside out, we may be a bit guilty in our industry sometimes of just assuming they know all these buzzwords, and actually we need to work to probably address that kind of, crypto's high risk, it's gambling, it's gaming, it's, dodgy investments, whatever it might be. Like, there is a bit of stigma there still, and I think we're trying to work to remove that from the narrative.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to education, doesn't it, really? And people feel, and building confidence. And we've always got this two tracks when it comes to these disciplines, where this is great, here are the positives, but then you've got, but some of this is spun by the media, of course, which doesn't help because they want salacious stories.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of, particularly was there one in America where a deep fake video of a CEO was told, his head of payments, to pay a few £1 million, and because it looked so authentic and genuine.
Yeah, and there's platforms that are looking at those videos and they're trying to pick up like expression-based defense mechanisms, because there is stuff within certain AI videos that is still missing slightly human, like even micro expressions, right?
Yes.
I'm sure that gap will be closed at some point, but it's going to be a constant battle. I mean, in payments, fraud still rises generally every year, despite security infrastructure getting better, and the reason for that is that fraudsters get smarter, and the systems that enable them to run scams improve with technology. So it's a constant battle that we have in the financial sector in general, not just in core payments.
Yeah, I actually spoke to somebody on an earlier episode about he presents himself as an ethical hacker, and his role is that's right, yeah, and his role is actually to test systems, because if you think about what happened with Jaguar Land Rover and M&S and Harrods. And it's quite frightening to think that some of these big institutions, let alone Joe Public or our parents and grandparents, that are getting hacked. Because, when it comes to payments, there's a big trust element there, isn't there?
There's a huge amount of data there, right, as well. I mean, we have things like tokenized cards, so card vaults, which will have millions of cards saved in them, and Visa and MasterCard and the card schemes have moved to network tokens, which mean you don't have the singular card number. There can be like a revolving card number in the background on that token. So there's stuff involved that's going to make it more difficult, and you have businesses that are on-prem in data centers that need to go into the cloud, which will help with their security in the long term. The classic example is something like M&S, probably, where big brand maybe becomes a little bit complacent, and then they've probably got the best security you can imagine now off the back of what happened. Sony was the big one many moons ago, where they lost a load of card data in one of their game stores, and no brand is safe from the best hackers in the world. In certain situations, they look for weaknesses in the wall, right, and chink in the armor. Or
patches, don't they? If they're not being updated with the relevant patches as well, it can be a real thing. So do you think we're going to move towards a more cashless society in this country? I remember I used to live in Cambridgeshire, and Arm were based in Cambridge. And I remember this must have been about 15, 20 years ago. They actually were talking about, they see the future as people having chips, stamped within their arm, literally, total recall. So I wondered whether or not we're going to see more payments through wearable tech.
I think we're already there, to be honest with you. I mean, we have wearable rings, which have been around for probably a decade now. People using their smartwatches, obviously, to make payment. And I think the beginning of the cashless society, it might never go fully that way, or we might be a decade or so away from that point.
Yeah.
But London's a prime example. You walk around how many cafes and coffee shops and restaurants and bars are very openly card only now. It says we don't take cash in the window. Like, that's pretty common. I think the Nordic market was probably the early adopter of that in Europe, where they rolled out a cashless society quite significantly.
Is that true? So
One of them, I don't know if it's Norway or Denmark, one of them did roll back last year, because again they got to that point where they felt they were excluding a certain part of society, so they had mandated now, I think, that you have to be able to accept cash. I think in the UK, like in the major cities certainly anyway, we're already at that point where cash is far less prevalent than it used to be.
So future gazing, what do you see is going to happen in the next few years that's going to be fairly transformational? We may have touched on some, but really keen to get your sort of final thoughts.
I think from a payments industry point of view, some of the regulation that we've got coming in has seen certain brands consolidate, and we've ended up with really large players in the market. And the reasoning behind that, I think, is that many businesses now, they operate both in-store and online, and they want one solution that can service the two different channels for them seamlessly. And I think most payments companies have struggled with that over the last decade or so. And I think some of the bigger players now have really started to solve those problems, even if it's, a street trader. They might have a small online store because it's easy to set one up with a Shopify or whatever it might be. You can do it overnight and you can be up and running trading online very, very seamlessly. So that's going to be a big part of it. And I think also, as far as things like stablecoins are concerned, there is an obsession with the speed in which we do everything in society now. And again, historically, payments transactions might have taken 3 working days to settle, and they take 1 working day now in the UK as an example. And then an open banking or pay by bank payment is immediate, right? And then people see something and they try it for the first time. They expect that in every part of the system, and you want that immediately.
It's the Amazon effect, isn't it?
You want your goods now, you want your services now, and you want your money now, especially, right?
Yeah.
I've sold something, someone's paid me, I don't want to have to wait for that. I want my money. So speed is the biggest one, and I think we've always worked very, very quickly as an industry. And that's why it's a great industry and exciting industry working. There's always something new. You talk about the stable coins and AI. Like, there's genuinely every few months something new arriving in the world of payments, and that's just makes it a fantastic industry to work in.
Yeah. Think about more assets being tokenized.
I think we've already, potentially. I mean, look, we've flirted with some of the tokenized assets, and we've seen, crypto create digital assets. I can't remember what they were called. NFTs, right?
NFTs,
absolute disaster of a thing, right? Like, people lost a load of money on it. Like, again, it's that hype train, it's that buzz. I think the main thing we'll see is fiat currencies, governments, main common currencies that people are familiar with and used to, starting to trust the stablecoin infrastructure that then exists, and then banks deploy. I mean, banks are invested in stablecoin infrastructure providers, payments companies are invested in them. Like, that is a transition that we're already kind of into the weeds of. And it's like everything. Open banking was new 5 years ago. It's now standardized. That AI will just be part of life at some point. It won't be a new thing anymore.
So, Grant, thank you so much for joining us today. How can people find out more about you?
So LinkedIn's always a great place to get in touch with Payment Shed Podcast, Payment Shed Newsletter. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all your usual channels. And we post something new every day, so there's always some new content to go and consume.
Check out the Payment Shed. Big thanks to our partners and sponsors, Branded Content Marketing Association, and also the Marketing Podcast Network. So from me, Gordon Glenister, it's bye for now.